Hi, everyone. We are so glad you're here joining us virtually today. You are in for a great conversation with Angela Davis and our experts, combined with your questions and insights into parenting during this challenging time. I am Babette Apland, and I lead Call to Mind, NPR's initiative to foster new conversations about mental health. We launched this media initiative 2 years ago, and the response has been remarkable. We're seeing pent-up demand from people like you seeking safe and trusted places for conversations about mental well-being. And since our lives have been upended by COVID-19, and we are coping with major changes, isolation, and uncertainty, the need to focus on mental health has never been greater. Before coronavirus, the CDC reported that half of us will experience a mental illness at some point in our lives, and 1 in 5 of us are dealing with a mental health condition each year. But now, a Kaiser Family Foundation study last month showed that nearly half of Americans are reporting that their mental health has been negatively impacted by worry and stress over this virus. Indeed, mental well-being is now a concern for everyone, coping with the dizzying changes caused by this pandemic. It is shining a light on how mental health is essential to overall well-being. COVID-19 is bringing mental health out into the open, and people are talking about it in new and important ways that are normalizing the conversation about mental health. For example, across the nation, governors and mayors are encouraging people to take care of their mental health. The good news is that now universal concern is melting away discrimination about mental health, and hopefully will lead to people and communities taking more action to care for mental health. So now I'm really excited to hear from our panel of experts and your insights about how parents can take care of their own mental well-being. COVID-19 is putting a lot of pressure on parents and caregivers, and like the advice to put on your oxygen mask first before your child's, we'll explore coping strategies that you can use during these challenging times so you can take care of your child. And we really want to hear from the parents and caregivers who are with us today to understand the challenges you're having taking care of yourselves. Now, we are recording this conversation for broadcast, and we hope to have this conversation on the radio next Wednesday during NPR News with Angela Davis. That's next Wednesday at 11 a.m. So now, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce Angela Davis, the host of NPR News with Angela Davis. Angela, many thanks for hosting this important discussion.
Oh, thank you, Babette, and hello to everyone. So nice to see you, Babette. I know you're not in the building right now. It's good to be able to see the faces of my colleagues. Hello, everybody, and thank you for making time for this important conversation today. I am really looking forward to it. As you may know, in addition to being a host here at NPR, I'm also the mother of 2 teenagers, a boy and a girl, and I can let you know I'm going through it with you. Just before we get started, I do want to let you know that while we are hosting this conversation live on Zoom, we are recording it, as Babette mentioned, to stream online and for the radio audience next week. And it will, barring any breaking news, we do plan to air it next Wednesday, June 3rd at 11 a.m. You'll be able to hear it on the radio. And you may, during this conversation, you may hear me do some rather radio-y kinds of things like reintroducing our guests. But the plan is for us to continue this conversation until about 2:15 this afternoon. And I'm going to see if I can adjust the volume control real quick here on my headphones. Hold on a second. Okay. Oh, yeah, that's better. I can hear myself a little bit better. That said, we do want to get you involved in the conversation. So go ahead. You can click the Q&A button at the bottom of the webinar screen to type your questions for our experts, and we will try to get to as many of the questions as we can, because we know we do have a lot of interest in this topic. We're also planning to provide some useful links as we go. And so right now, looks like our guests are both in place. We'll start with the radio introduction. So here we go. Welcome to Call to Mind, Spotlight on Parenting During Coronavirus. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic, it's having a major impact on all of our lives and the lives of our families. As caregivers during this time, the normal challenges of just getting food on the table, balancing work, and supporting the children in our lives are made even harder. Childcare is extra complicated, even if it's available to you. For the school age set, distance learning, it's adding tech support and on-demand tutoring responsibilities on top of everything else. So how can we better manage our own mental well-being? How can we better support our kids? That is what we're talking about. We're taking your questions in this recorded Zoom conversation. And we are joined by a couple of experts who should be able to help with some useful coping strategies to deal with these challenges to our mental health, as well as recommend some ways to find help when we are feeling overwhelmed. So that said, let me introduce the two guests today. We have Bravada Garrett Akinsanya, better known as Dr. B. Dr. B is a clinical psychologist who works with children, adolescents, and adults. She is the president and founder of Brakens Consulting and Psychological Services and the executive director of African American Child Wellness Institute Incorporated. Both are in Plymouth. There's her smiling face. Hi there, Dr. B.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Good to see you. We also have with us, Dr. B, we have Bobby Wegner joining us. Bobby is a clinical psychologist treating children, parents, and families at Boston Behavioral Medicine. She also teaches human development and psychology at Harvard University's Graduate School of Education. She is joining us from Boston. Hello, Dr. Wegner.
Hi, Angela. Hi, Dr. B.
Hello.
All right, let's get started. So, Dr. Wegner, I'll begin with you. It seems like many parents, they feel as though they've been put in an impossible situation right now, and it's affecting their mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're seeing as you interact with people who are coming to you for help?
Yeah, of course. So, I think they're feeling it because it's the reality and everyone's feeling it. And so I think, and I'm sure Dr. B, you can speak to this too, we're in this really unique place where, like, as clinicians, we're in the same place as our patients. So I'm sitting with my patients week to week, and what they're feeling emotionally, talking about their parenting struggles, I'm there with them too. So the bottom has really fallen out for parents. We are already in this really stressed culture, and we're on this very precarious scale where families are just trying to get through the day as is. And then COVID just came and decimated this whole thing. And so now there's added pressure for parents to homeschool, to parent, to be a good partner, to work, and they've lost all their support and their resources. So, parents are just spent and burnt out, and it's like there's not really a guideline because we've never gone through this before.
Dr. B, how do you describe what you are hearing and seeing with people who are coming to you for advice?
It's very similar to what Bobby just explained. And I think that one of the hardest things is that it wasn't well prepared for. People they didn't really get a heads up that it was going to be this much or this long. And that the whole system of support that parents were used to using would be kind of decimated. So if kids were problematic in the past and the parents were obligated to work at home or do something, they had a support system. They had grandma who was elderly, and now you can't take them there because of COVID. So a lot of the resources that are naturally supportive of parents have been really decimated and destroyed for them. And it's been very difficult. And the second part I think that I see is fear. I see fear every day. And the fear is, am I going to be someone who catches COVID? Am I going to be someone who goes out to get the groceries and comes home with something that I didn't leave with and endanger my children and my elderly mother who may be living with me. So the pervasive amount of fear is something that's pretty much atypical, because usually a trauma will be an incident and not something that continues a long period of time. Walking with that fear is a hard part, I think, that shows up a lot.
And do you think people, are they finding any comfort in recognizing, like, it's not just our home and our family, like everyone is going through this? Is there anything good that's coming out of, recognizing, it's not just me, my neighbor, my cousin, everyone is having the same struggle? Dr. Wegner?
Yeah, I think the one upside of this is there is that kind of shared community, and people are experiencing a lot of the same things. And there's been a lot of focus on mental health, which is, I think, only going to serve everybody in the long run, to be able to like really give voice to the emotional experience, and to really say, like, people aren't scared to say, like, today just totally was terrible. And they feel, I think, more comfortable doing that because they know other people can relate. I think there's this uncertainty that's, like, as Dr. B was saying, that's just creates this feeling where emotions are changing so rapidly and we don't really have a framework for it. So it's just really, really hard. It's sort of impossible to not live in an emotional world right now.
Personally, I think I'm struggling with guilt, like feeling as though I'm not the best version of myself. And like, I should be a better person. I should be more patient. I should be, more understanding when I'm around my kids. And is that something that you're hearing a lot, that parents are acknowledging? I feel guilty, Dr. B.
Yeah, I think they are experiencing role strain. That's what we call it, role strain. And it's because a parent may be used to wearing one or two hats, but they don't have to have them all on at the same time. So the strain of not knowing how to help your child with algebra, or the strain of how do I organize a whole day when I have to do my own work and still get food on the table. So that role strain is the thing that you're talking about, and it does lead to guilt, because somehow, some message somewhere, somebody has told us that as parents we need to be right on it all the time, and it's so ridiculous and unfair and unhealthy that we almost have to rewrite the script of what a good enough parent is.
Dr. Wegner?
Yeah, I mean, Dr. B, to your point, I just think it's so true. There's like, part of that is also this, there are these shifting family dynamics. So, a family is a system, much like a company or government or different societies that organize themselves to function successfully in like whatever way that means. And so, I mean, just personally, I remember I was actually in Minneapolis. I'm in Boston now, and I kind of flew home that night, and Saturday morning I woke up and it became very clear that we were just hardcore in a state of emergency. And I just sort of had this realization, like, I'm not going to be going anywhere anytime soon. And this is going to shift how I operate and how we function as a family. So my husband and I had to kind of find a new way of working together, and a new way of parenting, and a new way for our kids to relate to us, a new way of working with my mom who's aging. So it's like this reshifting and recalibrating of all these different dynamics. So it's just a lot to deal with. The coping that we generally rely on with structure is just like gone. And so we're kind of figuring out as we go.
Well, Dr. B, Dr. Wegner, those were my questions. I want to get to the many questions that we have from our listeners today as we talk about mental health and what caregivers and parents are coping with right now. And this question comes from Jennifer in St. Paul. And Jennifer writes, please address impact of trauma and loss that we and our children have to accept. So when we think about loss, I mean, our schedules, routines, there's so much: events, celebrations, birthday parties, loss, and trauma. Dr. B, what would you say to that?
I begin to say that understanding trauma is really critical to overcoming it or going through it. I don't know that you actually overcome trauma, but you go through it. And the resilience of many communities to go through hard times is historical, and the ability to overcome, whether it be historical trauma like racism and discrimination and hate, or whether it be this new lived reality of so many deaths around you, that it's just, you can't go grieve naturally. You can't go hug and hold each other like you would naturally do. Some people aren't even able to have funerals
Right.
because, you know, of the limitations on being in crowds. And the other trauma that seem to be really, really scary is, again, that thought that if I go beyond what I'm supposed to do, I could die. And that's very scary for people. The second part is the grief and loss. Now, I see right now a lot of high school kids. You work 12 years. Some of them even went to summer school so that they could graduate on time. And the vision of having that cap and that gown and everybody surrounding you in your loved community, being there for you and celebrating you and having big dinners, and all of those things are losses for the current 2020 graduates. So the things that they had, the fantasies they held, they were destroyed through this process. And the best way to do it is realize that while there may be grief, like the Chinese sign for opportunity is also the same, right? The same sign that they have for tragedy. And the key is to how to reposition, or what we psychologists call cognitive reframing, how to reframe your experience, how to go deep into your own roots and your resilience, and understand that you have creative ways that you can go through this, new rituals that you can create. And I have ideas when we get to that part later about how parents can help their family with new rituals and new ways to connect, even though you may not physically be together, because family and community does not necessarily mean proximity. It means there's a shared spirit in your heart that connects you no matter how far you are.
Dr. Wagner, there was a question about trauma and loss, and
Right.
you know, when we look at grief, there's also, I mean, people are dying. There's loss of lives as well as loss of routine.
I mean, so I think it's really important. I'm so glad both of you named it. We should look at this where we are temporarily in time right now as through the lens of trauma. So, you know, you hear a lot of people talking, or a lot of parents saying, I can't homeschool and I can't work and I can't, and they're really trying to keep up with these sort of like past lives. And that's just not where we are right now. It's sort of like all bets are off, and we have to think about past traumas that other cultures have experienced, or past traumas that we've experienced in our country, and how do we get through it. And what we really know, what serves people best, is close connection. So connected relationships with the people closest to you mediate mental health outcomes. So it's like, so it means like, okay, I don't need to be worrying about what I have to do in 6 weeks because we're in a cultural trauma right now, and I need to make sure my kids feel safe, they feel connected, and they know I'm here for them. So really taking it in like much smaller steps. And the other thing I'm thinking about trauma is that like, we're not all going through this, you know, kind of at level footing. Some of us are in better social positions to manage this than other people. And unfortunately, like one trauma brings up old traumas. So we see this with death a lot. You know, you kind of lost somebody in your life a long time ago, and then you kind of deal with it and move through it. And then someone else dies in the future, and all those old feelings come up. So it's really not so different with trauma. So people can actually be almost getting re-traumatized just through this experience.
Yes.
And kind of being aware as a parent where you are in that. Having a little bit of self-awareness, self-compassion, taking time to self-reflect, and just be gentle with yourself, knowing that these feelings might seem really surprising that you're experiencing, but they're actually very normative where we are. It's a normal response to an abnormal event is how we think about trauma.
Dr. B, that reopening of an old wound is what many people may be feeling.
Yeah, and I agree with Dr. Wagner as she talked about the linking of traumatic situations to each other. That, you know, at one point the decoupling may occur, but then somehow something can come up that reconnects you. And today parents, especially parents of color, are dealing with what I call high stakes parenting conditions. High stakes means that if you don't do it quite right, something terribly wrong we mean life and death issues could happen with your children. And so because parents are doing this work in under high stakes conditions, they may have a level of stress that is overbearing. We call that the allostatic load, and it gets to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. So parents begin to feel like they can't manage it. And so one of the things we have to do is, one, let them know that it is exactly as my sister, Dr. Wagner, said. It's a normal reaction to an abnormal event. And then the second thing we want people to know is that abnormal events require unusual requirements and responses, and that they can do it. That's why they still exist. That's why they're still standing. Is their strength in their own personal, familial, family resilience and individual resilience. And we help people to see what those things are that they can use to propel them to wellness.
I want to bring in another question and thank our listeners who are tuning in and joining us on Zoom. Stephanie has this question or this comment. It's both a lonely time. It's both a time when we are around our family too much. But how do I balance those contradictory feelings of loneliness and no alone time? So lonely, but at the same time around people too much, in conflict. And what would you say about that, Dr. Wagner?
Yeah, I'm really glad Stephanie brought that up, because you can hold two feelings at once that are in paradox, right? So we call it polarized parts. There's a part of her that feels desperately alone and overburdened and stimulated, kind of annoyed, frustrated. Stephanie, I completely feel you 1000%. So I haven't quite figured this out, but I think it's something we're all struggling with. And I think some of the loneliness is like, we have such a loss of other relationships. So a lot of the relationships that fuel us, like for me, it's friends, it's social engagements, it's work stuff, all of that's gone for right now. And like, of course, the parenting and home stuff is feeling good, but there's also a lot of loss that's tied to a sense of loneliness too. And generally, as where we are as a culture in America, is we're struggling with loneliness before COVID hit. And this has just made it worse. And we need the physical connection. So, I mean, there's a lot of research that shows the importance of physical contact with people. That stimulates part of our brain, neurotransmitters and dopamine. And it's, we're really like in sort of a deprivation mode right now. So of course they're going to feel lonely.
So, I mean, I remember thinking like, oh, I wish I had more time with my kids. They're so busy with sports and activities. Now they're always there. And so it's like in either scenario, I'm just like, I feel bad. Dr. B,
Parenting's hard.
What do you say about loneliness and then just, but I want some alone time?
Yeah, it's, I think it's just because it's so extreme. We could deal when we had a space of moderation, but you're extremely overwhelmed with kids never going anywhere and being right up under you. And then at the same time, you're extremely isolated in your natural support system that you do have to physically touch and see and hold. And so those two ends is what makes it so difficult, I think, for people to cope. Is just extreme. And so then you have to focus on, how can I put balance in a situation that's really all by itself unbalanced?
Well, let me bring in another question. This is related. This is from Jolene, who is talking about balancing work and motherhood. How do I carve out alone time and adult time? Do you do you lock yourself in the bathroom? I mean, where are you going to go? Like, how are you able to be alone? Okay, I guess you could take a walk, right?
I mean, I think everyone's trying to figure that out for themselves. I don't know if it's a one size fit all thing. I think getting out and doing a walk is really important, or even getting up before the kids. So I had a patient recently talk about how she feels like her kids have grown up a little bit, but she's back in sort of new motherhood, and there's just lots of time and self and space, and it can just feel like so much. So pulling back, like I help my clients look back on what's worked for them in the past. So what works for me isn't going to necessarily work for you, but looking back to other times in your life where you felt this way and see what works. But I think getting up before the kids can be really helpful if that's what you need, really quiet.
Okay.
But
Let's bring in another question here. This is from JC in Bloomington, and I appreciate this one. I'm usually more angry than I want to be. How do I stop that from being contagious? She's concerned about, or JC's concerned about vices like substance use creeping in and becoming creeping in an unhealthy way. So recognizing I'm having anger issues, and I don't want that, and I don't want that to cause other people in my home to be angry as well. Is that a response that you're hearing a lot of people are dealing with? Is just anger over the situation, and how do we manage that, Dr. B?
Yeah, I do see that quite a bit. And I like to tell the audience that those of us who do psychotherapy, we discover pretty early in our work that anger is a very common experience of being human. But we also learned that anger is always the second emotion. And what we have to do is stop and say, why am I angry? What is leading to this anger? Anger is propelled by fear, isolation. It's fulfilled by a sense of inadequacy or shaming or disappointment or hurt. And then you get angry. And sometimes if parents stop and kind of do some cognitive mapping, go back in their head, I'm angry because of this, sounding like a 2-year-old, they ask you a question, they say, why? And then you answer and they say, why? So you do that to yourself, and eventually you'll hit the space where that why is behind the anger. And people manage that anger because they feel ashamed to be angry. We learn in our society that when we're little, we get punished when we do things wrong and get angry. So we see that as a bad thing, but your anger needs to be there so you can recognize and go back in your cognitive mapping to see what's causing it. So people need to be able to do that.
Dr. Wegner?
Yeah, I mean, I think anger is a very natural, normal emotion, but it gets sort of a bad rap in our culture. So it's really, instead of saying like, I wish I didn't feel this way, it's like taking a curious stance. I wonder why I feel this way right now. And that's sort of what Dr. B is saying. And also you're modeling. So you're expressing a feeling that everybody's feeling. I imagine your kids are feeling it, your partner, whomever's in your life feels that too. So if you can notice it and name it and like have a little self-compassion for yourself, you're showing your kids that it's okay to have this feeling too, and that anger doesn't have to be scary. You can notice it, name it, and move on. And that's really the goal. Dr. B started out saying that, the goal is to really move through emotion and move through these experiences. And anger is like one of these things. It's kind of like whack-a-mole. If you just try to push it down, it's going to pop up in another way. And so it's like, all right, well, what do I need to do to take care of myself here? And we also know emotions come and go. You're not going to be stuck in anger for your whole life. If you give this enough time, this will fade away and another emotion will come. So just have a little patience with yourself and show your kids how to sit through it.
Another guest I interviewed recently, I believe he's a chaplain, said that emotions need motion.
Oh yeah.
Just allow yourself to feel it, and it'll pass.
Stuck. So emotions, if you don't kind of let them out, I always say to the kids I work with or my own kids, emotions are like bubbles in your body, and they need to come out one way or the other. Otherwise, you're going to get a bellyache. And so it's the same thing. You got to find a way to kind of, work this out.
I want to share what Kirsten in Chanhassen is asking. Kirsten wants to know, what are some techniques and practices I can use when I notice myself being triggered by my kids and others? What are some techniques and practices I can use when I notice myself being triggered by my kids or others? So like for me, when I notice like, oh, I have like my little facial tick going here, it's like I'm starting to, you can feel yourself like I'm starting to do something or say something I'm going to regret. Is there a way to get ahead of that or to intervene when you notice like I'm at a breaking point right now? Dr. B?
Oh, I love that. I love that that statement and that question, because I don't know if you guys ever heard of, I'm sure you've heard of this rapper. His name was DMX. And he had this song, Y'all Gonna Make Me Act a Fool Up in Here.
Yeah, that's been playing in a lot of houses right now.
Yeah.
So So the first thing I think that a parent really needs to do is cut yourself some slack. Some techniques that parents have done is to organize around and create structure for themselves and their kids during the day so that they could all have a break. They try to have lunch together, but while the kids are doing homework, the parents would be doing their work. And they may even be in a similar location where that they can make sure that everybody's doing their job. I also heard a lot of parents talk about taking parent time outs. So kids know about time out as a punishment, but when the parent gets to the edge that they're gonna act a fool, they may have to say, you know, mama needs a time out. I'm gonna be in that time out till the bell rings, and maybe give yourself 10 or 15 minutes and go lock yourself in the bathroom if you have more than one, because you don't want any accidents when you come out.
Right.
But basically, there are strategies, creative strategies that parents can use. And finally, one of the things you may learn to do is get you some headphones and some good music and sit on the couch and make sure that you can see that no blood is happening, and just keep it moving.
So music and but just recognizing that, yeah, if like you can feel it, like, yes, that is a thing.
That's
Dr.
right, and
Wagner,
it's real.
any
Everybody has, I just was reading some like research article, and it said I think 50% of Americans rate their stress level right now at like 8, 9, or 10.
Yep.
I mean, think about what that is. That's so insane, right? And we're all living this. But we all have default ways of responding to anxiety, stress, intense emotion. So the first step in anything is self-awareness and self-reflection. So like for Angela, you notice your little twitch. For me, I start, my shoulders get tight and I get very impatient. But when I start to notice that in myself, that's a sign to me that I need to kind of like slow down, do something else. There's a framework we're working on with a project right now, and I use this, I learned working with patients who have kind of mild to moderate brain injury, but it really is helpful for parents. So these intense emotions flood the system, and when you're really emotionally regulated, you can't think clearly. It's like when your amygdala is firing, your frontal lobe suppresses. So it's just, you can't outthink or, you know, kind of convince yourself you shouldn't feel this way, but you have to slow down the cognitive process. So it's stop, what is the problem? Okay, I feel myself getting really angry right now. What are my options of handling this? And literally mapping them out, writing down like a probability of success in whatever way makes sense for you, and then picking your best option. So it just slows down the cognitive loop that we often get in as people. We have the way we think, it's sort of like skiing or sledding. You know, we have these default ways of thinking, and we go to that so naturally, and you can ski down the hill like so easily in that thought pattern. And we're trying to slow down the process to give you options to think differently or try something else.
I want to bring in another question. You know, one of the big impacts of COVID-19 pandemic, schools closed, and you know, safety concerns, like, you know, kids can't even go to their playgrounds, right? Because we're trying to avoid the spread of the virus. Brittany says this: I worry about my 5-year-old who is an only child. How long can he go without contact with other kids before it impacts his mental health? And in many scenarios, parents are finding themselves being the playmates for their kids. So any suggestions, and what should we know about, you know, young kids? This is a 5-year-old not able to, you know, play with his friends. And like, how do you explain that without, you know, creating fear and making it worse? Dr. B?
There are some very important developmental tasks that occur at 5. And the ability to share, to think and problem solve, they are very much emerging in that preschool age group. And so being able to do that, it does require optimally other children with whom one can connect. So one of the suggestions I would say is, if a parent has technology, there are ways that children can, because trust me, even 5-year-olds, they know how to operate the computer. Unlike most of us, when we're like 50, we still don't know how to do it, but 5-year-olds, they can do that. And so there are ways that you can connect them with cousins, with classmates, with relatives, and then you will have to find time yourself as a parent to actually touch and play with them. Other people have done things as simple as doing their own mapping in terms of exposure to COVID. So some families have committed to support each other by being there for each other physically. And they keep a track of where they go and with whom they go. And they got their test. They went to take their test to make sure that they didn't have it at the time. But you know, you can have it, didn't have it last week and have it today. So they kind of map where they go and what they do. And they're very careful. The kids still play, they play together, they do things they have to, but there's strong hygiene, there's social distancing, the Red Rover game, come over, like we used to hold hands, you just come on over, nobody's gonna stop you, you just roll over there. So it's a lot of ways that parents can create that environment for their children, but it really requires a lot of attention, a lot of awareness of safety, and a great deal of structure. But if you're willing to do that at least once a week, where you can hold that guard, you can really help your kids to do what they need to in terms of addressing those critical stage developmental tasks.
So Dr. White, this person is asking about a 5-year-old and concerned about, this child not being able to play with friends. How do you, have that conversation, and how worried should we be about, young kids not being in contact with their friends?
I think there's a couple different ways my mind goes here. To Dr. B's point, I think, we really have to balance what works for our family. Of course, we want to be safe and be a good citizen, and, but you also have to trust your gut. I was just working with a parent recently who has, a kid that struggles with a severe disability, and his reward system's all thrown off because he uses play dates as like rewards. And now there's rising other threats like at home because of that. And it's like, all right, pause here. Let's take a very rational approach. What is the most pressing issue? If your kid's really struggling, follow your gut and trust your own wisdom here, and like trust yourself first and foremost. But secondly, kids are really resilient. This is a moment in time. Right now we're at week 9, 10, 11, who even knows where we are, but it's a moment in time, and kids will like flex and bend with it, and they look to us. So one thing that I'm hearing in that statement is like, this mom's trying to be the best mom she can be, but also not worrying so far in advance. If your kid's looking okay to you and it feels sort of okay in the moment, that's like where you're supposed to be right now. And don't worry about the future, because as we've learned, this is changing day to day. And, if you're worrying about it, your kid's sensing it, and then they're going to start stressing.
That's right.
Here's a related question from Paula. Paula is asking, should I be encouraging my kids to hang out with their friends 6 feet apart? They don't seem to want to. And so I think a lot of parents of teenagers, we know teenagers, they can understand and manage social distancing. And so what should we be encouraging them to do or discouraging them to do, and if they do want to see their buddies? Dr. B?
I would say the same thing I said earlier, is just to help them to maintain social distance. And I can tell you, one of the advantages of being in Minnesota is that you learn how to do that because of the snow. And because there are times it's so cold, you can't go walk down your friend's house, although some kids would want to. They know how to connect with each other. They have those skills. And so the thing I would teach as a parent and with my teenage child would be to be creative in how you can connect with each other. And if they can do that, that's fine. And I would definitely, like, once again, try to make sure that I could assure that they're being safe. And the reason they don't want to do a lot of the connecting is because they want to live to see college. They want to live to get married. They want to.
Some of them are very concerned because they're watching and reading the news, so they may be overly worried about their safety.
Yep. And when that happens, it's our job to reassure them that you're taking the right steps. You're being using common sense. I'm very proud of you making these decisions not to do something risky. And so those are ways that parents can support them. And I think that if we sit with our kids and actually have a conversation about what do you want, what do you need, how can I help you? I tell you, every time that happens, children will eventually say, they may come out saying at first, I don't know, but then you talk to them longer, they will tell you what they really want.
Because they can, take walks together and, 2 or 3 of them in small groups, still be 6 feet apart, wear masks. They can go bike riding together, perhaps. Those would be valuable experiences, do you feel?
Yes.
Right, Dr. Wegner?
Yeah,
Social
I mean, I
distancing.
think this is no different. Well, it is different, but adolescents are experimenting with dangerous behaviors all the time. This is a normal developmental task. And we also know that telling them what to do and not to do is just fraught, right? It's like, that doesn't work. So how can you join with them around this? And actually, this could be an opportunity to give them responsibility to learn self-care and to think through like their options. So I have this like super wise neighbor who has, they live next door, and I just love the way they parent, and they have the nicest kids. And how they've handled this is they lay out all the options for their kids. So what do you want to do here? What are your options? So you can go to the parking lot and hang out in the back of your car and listen to the radio and talk. You can go to someone's house, share drinks, and that's one, like you're just laying out all your options, but kind of walk through the consequences. We know adolescents, their frontal lobes aren't fully developed until they're 25, so they're not thinking long-term consequence. So you just want to like kind of bridge their options now with the potential long-term consequences, but then trust that they, that you've raised them well enough to this point to make good, sound decisions, and be with them as they go through this.
Marie in South St. Paul says she is curious about anxiety in children 10 and under. What to do when kids won't or don't want to talk about it? When do I contact a professional? What behavior is concerning enough to reach out for help? So if you have a situation where a child has just doesn't want to talk about the changes, just doesn't want to engage, I mean, when do we know that there's a sign that something is more serious, that you might want to reach out to a mental health professional? Dr. Wegner?
Yeah, I would trust her intuition again. If she feels like something's radically different for her child, then it probably is, and then to seek professional consultation. We also know for kids 7 and under and even older, they don't communicate with words. So it's very reassuring as a parent to say, hey, tell me how you're feeling. But that's not how your 5-year-old, 4-year-old, 7-year-old is going to communicate with you. But,
what are they going to do?
So playing's great, drawing's great. Having sidebar conversations where that's not face-to-face. Face-to-face interaction can be just super intimidating for kids, but you could just ask, how they're feeling and like move on. Don't force it at all. And engage them in play with dolls or drawing or manipulatives, and trust your gut. If you feel like something's wrong, then like there's no harm in getting consultation. You can get consultation and not sign up for like 10 years of therapy. You can have a one-off with a therapist that can help you sort if this is a problem or it's not a problem.
Mm-hmm. I can just visualize that. Like, you want to talk about it? No. Then what do
Totally.
you do, Dr. B? What do you do?
Well, I think Dr. Wegner just hit the nail on the head when she talked about, one, using parental intuition, and if you know something's wrong with your child, and over a course of time, you've learned how to get in touch with them or touch base with them. The second thing I think is that I would be concerned if I were a parent if my child was usually very, very talkative and suddenly stopped being. I'd be concerned if my child was a really studious child and suddenly stopped studying. So whatever is normal for your child, when that normal behavior stops or halts, that's when you want to ask some questions. And if the child doesn't feel comfortable asking, just like Dr. Wegner just said, you give them other opportunities, because sometimes kids have journals or diaries and they can write their feelings in there. Some of the kids I see, especially the older kids, they make up songs. Some of them dance, they do interpretive dance. So it's a lot of ways for them to touch their feelings without the use of words. And as long as you create that outlet and you're there in a way that lets them feel like they're not being threatened or forced into telling whatever it is they're feeling, you'll do fine.
Yeah, I think too, like the hallmark for any therapist or whomever you're seeing, they're going to ask about sleeping, eating, and energy. So if those change and are radically different, then that's I'd be curious about that. So if you're looking to your own kid and the sleeping's way off one way or the other, eating's way off one way or the other, energy's way off, then you probably want to get some consultation.
Okay. Well, welcome to Call to Mind. I'm Angela Davis, and this is Spotlight on Parenting During Coronavirus. You're listening to a recorded Zoom conversation about ways parents and caregivers can better manage their own mental wellness during this time so we can be more balanced in supporting our children, our entire families. I want to reintroduce our guests. We have Bravada Garrett Akinsanya, known as Dr. B. She is a licensed psychologist and independent clinical social worker at Breakins Consulting and Psychological Services. She's also the clinical director of African American Child Wellness Institute. Both are in Plymouth. And we also have with us, joining us from Boston, Bobby Wegner. Dr. Wegner is a clinical psychologist treating children, parents, and families at Boston Behavioral Medicine, and she also teaches human development and psychology at Harvard University. And we're taking your questions, lots of questions. Our next one comes from Ga. Ga says, my 10-year-old daughter may be depressed and I am not sure how to help. She is irritable and screams at my husband and me all the time now. We have given her some space, allowing her to be alone a lot in her room. Is that a good idea? So many parents, I think, are seeing their kids, as we discussed, not wanting to talk about it, retreating to their room for hours. What's going on in the rooms? What are they doing in there? What do you think, Dr. B?
Well, first of all, I've always been the type of parent that I will break some boundaries. If you're in your room too long, I will come visit you. I might bring a sandwich, but I am going to come see you. And when you feel that your child is acting differently, like we were saying earlier, there's sleep problems, irritability, mood changes and shifts that weren't there before. Those are signs that there is something wrong and that it may be situational, which would pass with the situation, or it could be so bad that it's becoming biological, where there may be a need for medical intervention or assessment. So when we begin to see those things, it's important to try to get in there. I'm telling you, you have liberty. You pay for your house note. Don't just walk in now because anything could be happening, but do knock and bring a sandwich or some cookies and milk. I don't care if they're 18, they'll go for cookies and milk. You walk in there and you just say, what's going on? You've been in here all day and I miss you. And just shut up, zip it, and listen. They may say nothing. And you say, okay, well, can we just sit together and do nothing together? And sometimes that really helps. I'm just saying be active. Don't sit back and say, oh, I better not say anything. Don't do that because kids are often just waiting for that question to be asked. They're just waiting.
Dr. Wegner?
I mean, come on, how can I trump that response? Like Dr. B just has it. But I think the thing is, what you're really kind of saying is that parents get really freaked out about mental health problems and they end up like not knowing what to say. So don't say anything. That's by far the worst thing you can do. So you're better off to say something and have your kid be like, wait, what are you talking about? I'm fine. I just need space. But at least and you can work with it. But be curious, join them, figure out what they're trying to achieve by doing that and work it out with them. And it could be a real thing.
She asked about screaming too, which is, if that's not a normal way that your child interacts with you. So in toddlers, we think about tantrums, and older kids, screaming and raising voices. Are we seeing more of that now? And then how do you handle that, Dr. B?
Well, it's a behavior problem. And if it's an occasional scream, well, let's just face it. All of us want to scream sometime.
Right.
So there are some things that you can do in your house. I'm just going to give you a couple of tips. If they feel like screaming and the house is too small for all that screaming, because you don't want them crying wolf, because there may be a time they need to really scream. So you can tell a kid to scream in the pillow. One exercise I do often is called box beating. And it's really from ancient African traditions of drumming and handling anger. But you just get a regular box from Target or somewhere, and you get a bat. Usually the plastic ones are good, and you just have the kids to hit the bat on the box and making that noise. Every time they hit it, the rule is if you hit it, you got to use some words. So you can say, I'm mad, bam. I'm sick of being in this house, bam. I wish I could go play with my friends, bam. And then by the time, the whole object of the game is to tear up the box. And when the box is torn up, you stop and you say, now let's claim our power back from the universe. Let's do a positive affirmation. And they would, sometimes you have to coach them, and they may say, you know, I'm a beautiful African-American girl. I'm gonna graduate one day and become the doctor I wanna be. This is just a moment in time, and I will survive. and just sometimes you have to say the words and they repeat it. But the key is to turn all that negative energy into a place where it can be sublimated or used for good.
Dr. Wegner, how is a parent supposed to respond to a child screaming at him or her?
Yeah. I think part of me wonders, or like, I know this is like they're just writing in, so there's not a lot of information. So I also don't want to minimize like how concerning this is or not. There's just kind of like not enough, a ton of information to understand. But like we were talking about earlier, that's a behavior, and then we want to understand the emotion under the behavior. So I would really go heavy on like what's going on underneath that behavior. How is she getting her needs met by screaming? Is she getting more attention from the parents? Like there's functionality in all behavior. So this behavior is serving something. So we got to understand what that is. We also, there's rules of a house too. Kids need structure and rules. So I have 3 super active kids. My 9, they all wrestle kind of constantly. And quite honestly, a lot of parents get scared of that. I just say, take it outside. I mean, I have a yard, so I have a trampoline, and it's pretty much like pediatric cage fighting, but it works. And I was like, as long as they're not doing it in my kitchen, it gives them you space. They get out their energy, and then they kind of, it just works for us.
I have a couple more questions. They're somewhat related. Joanne says, I check in with my kids a lot. What else can I say besides, how are you handling all of this? And another question about what do we say? Ben in Minneapolis writes this: what questions should we be asking our children? So Dr. Wegner, Dr. B, give us some advice, give us some words. What do we say when we are able to talk to our kids and we're trying to find out how they're feeling, trying to give them some attention? Give us some words, Dr. B.
One is, I care about you and I care about how you're feeling. Can you tell me how you're feeling right now? That's one set. The second one can be as simple as, I don't know the words to ask you how you're feeling, but I want you to know I want to know. They can copy me and use any of those.
Ooh, I'm getting ready to cry. You got that. I wanted to respond to you, but we're working right now. That's good.
Really, it works very well.
It just comes from the heart. Dr. Wegner?
In my family, we use humor a lot, but so we do like highlights and lowlights. So what's a highlight of your day, low light of your day? And you want to be careful not to ask yes or no questions, because they can just say like yes or no, but it's how can you ask these very open-ended things. And if you say, what's your highlight, what's your low light, it takes the pressure off them to kind of bare their soul and talk about, their deep emotions. But, through that sharing, you'll get a real sense of where they are emotionally. And I would go first. You always have to go first. You can't ask your kids to do anything that you wouldn't actually do yourself. So when I'm working with my kids, I always think about, where do I want them to go and how do I show them how to get there?
Okay, here's another question. Kate in Corcoran says, other families have more lax rules. How do we tell other parents what our rules are? That's a great question. So if there is some social interaction going on, how do you communicate? Because you don't tell other people how to parent their kids, but in this environment, we at times have to be on the same page. So what would you say to Kate there about how do you handle different household rules between families where your children are visiting or with their friends? That's some words. Give us some words for that, Dr. Wegner.
Well, I think the best thing is you don't want to put someone on the spot. There's a lot of shame going on with this, but the best thing again is to go first. It's like, in our family, we do this. How are you handling it? So it's like taking a curious stance rather than a judging stance. Rather than saying, I need you to do this, you're saying, this is how we do it. I would love to see you. Do you think this would work? So it's just like a little bit of a different thing.
It's not attacking or
not attacking and not shaming. We're all in different places with this.
Right.
We have different family members. We have different needs. So invite a conversation rather than say like, what are you doing? Don't
And
move now.
recognizing
Yeah,
too, like some families, you have elderly family members living in
completely.
those homes.
Or
So
babies.
or infants, right? Or
Hmm.
someone with a medical condition that you are being very protective of. So I could see how families would have very different rules, Dr. B?
And I often advise parents to look at things in the A, B, or C basket. The A basket is what are your primary priorities, right? In terms of what must happen. And then the B is, I can kind of take it or leave it. And C, I don't care if it happens or not. So there are behaviors in each of those three areas. And the main thing is if you're engaging with other parents, you don't want your A behaviors to be violated. And you may want to say, I don't mind them going to the store, but he can't take more than $3 or $4, or our parent has to be with them, or whatever your A basket things are. Because after that, you can really usually not worry about your child being exposed to people who are more lax. Right? Because they're not going to live there. They're just going to be engaging with them. And so you can identify your A's.
Paula in St. Louis Park asked this question: how can we make the most of the next few months instead of writing it off as the worst summer ever? I think a lot of us are feeling a lot of dread. Like, what are we going to do for the next couple of months if all things remain the same? Are there some opportunities? What can we be thinking about that can make the most of this time? Any suggestions, Dr. Wegner?
Yeah, I think, it's not just letting this time happen to you. That you have to be an active participant in your life, right? COVID's here. It's our reality. But, I've been doing this personally and working with clients too around finding pleasure. So seeking pleasure very intentionally. So like, what brings me the most joy? When do I find myself laughing the hardest? When do I feel the best version of myself? And if that's not happening, I need to seek it and I need to plan for it. And for me, I've kind of made a pact with a good friend and we're hanging out more, but that's when I feel the best and I love it. And it's making this time really fun.
We want to have a good summer, Dr. B. Any suggestions?
I think, again, it's just being very intentional and planful and allowing. Let me say this. There was a great healer that once told me, you don't have to teach a cut how to heal. You just need to create a condition for the healing to take place. So when I think about that, I think about creating the condition for fun to take place, for intimacy to take place, for growth to take place. And when I think back as a child on some of my fondest memories, they were when we were running from tornadoes in storm cellars in Texas. And we would hear our parents tell stories about the good old days, and we would get to do things like learning to knit or do things that we'd never done before. So sometimes, even though it looks like a tragedy, it can create a place and time that creates positive memories for a lifetime. So this is an opportunity to cherish your children, to cherish your friends, and also, honey, cherish yourself.
But we do need to make some plans. We need to be proactive in this.
Very and intentional.
So think about it. This is a question from David. David writes, how do we replace the critical interactions between our young kids and their grandparents? I had kids to look forward for the grandkids. How do we keep from losing those family moments? So right now, a lot of young kids and grandparents can't see each other, or it's advised that they don't because of potential health risks. What can we do about that to continue those relationships and deal with that loss, those interactions? Dr. Wegner?
Yeah, I don't think there is a perfect solution here. And I think in part what we were talking about before is acknowledging what we're losing and realizing this isn't forever. But especially with like the older people that we love in our lives, like this is more indefinite, right? Like my mom's 84. I don't know when I'll be. So trying to find ways to connect. My mother-in-law will drive down in the car and just stay in the car. So it's not the same, but she can see
him. They can
see. Or I'll go visit
Mm-hmm.
my mom and sit in the doorway outside, and it's not the best, but it's not the worst either. There's a way to be safe and be rational and do what works for your family. So I would think creatively with your family around this, and I'm sure she could come up with some really good options, but give yourself the freedom to do what works for you without just like kind of blindly following what sort of you're being told.
Any suggestions, Dr. B?
No, I don't. She actually said everything I was going to say. So I ditto. That's all I can say. The sisters got it.
Okay, this from Greta. Greta asks, what are some ways we can support fellow parents that we know are struggling to balance work-life parenting, homeschooling more than others? Yes, not everyone's been impacted the same way. If we want to be supportive of other parents, what can we do? Ideas, Dr. B?
Well, what I have found that has been working is this concept of collectivism. And what has happened is a group of parents whose kids are in the same school or the same class, they took turns playing school with the kids. So your day is Monday, mine's Tuesday, somebody else has Wednesday, and it kind of worked very well because you didn't feel guilt of not having your child, not being there to help your kid, and you were able to use the rest of your time. So I think things like that are very creative. And if you have expertise and you're good at math, then maybe you can volunteer to be the math teacher, while Ms. Johnson, she's good at English, she can be the English teacher. So there are ways that they can do that and create that community.
Oh, that's nice. Any ideas on how we can support each other?
Yeah, I think part of it is like letting go of any value judgment, and I think there's in the parenting world, there's a lot of judgment that often happens for people, kind of in between parents, but especially right now, you think what you're doing is the right way, and that can be so divisive. So trying to be really focused on what you're doing for your family and how it makes the most sense for your family, but that might be different for your neighbor or your friend, and being flexible in the way you're thinking about it. But more concretely, like even the little ones, little Zoom play dates work. So it's like my 6-year-old was walking around with her iPad showing her class, like her fish. I mean, it seemed to me completely boring. And I was like, I can't believe they're doing this for 45 minutes. But they were just like walking around their house, looking at different stuff. And they were so connected, and it freed me up and the other parents to kind of do other stuff. It entertained her for like, a long time.
Yeah, you're like, keep going, baby. Show them the bathroom.
I'm like, check the backyard. Have you seen the car?
All right. Here's a question from Deanna. Deanna writes, will kids think they are not wanted or a burden because of COVID stress? So should we be thinking about, we've talked about how the kids are watching us to see how we're reacting to it. Should we be worried that some kids will feel like they're to blame for everyone being stressed and unhappy that they're seeing?
I feel like kids get their messaging from us. So, it's especially depending on like how old your kid is, but anything under high school, they're hearing what you're sending. So be thoughtful and aware of what messaging you're sending, and just know how your own fear is coming out and what ways it comes out, because we all have it, it's there. And just have a little bit of self-awareness to know like how your kids are reading you, and ask them if you're not sure.
Dr. B?
We have this program as a boot camp for parents. It's called Project Marua, Premeditated Parenting Boot Camp. And what it means is that you think about parenting before you do it. And so it's a very thoughtful, engaging process that we teach. And when I hear that kids feel that they are being a burden to their parents, the parent either has said things verbally or behaviorally that have shown them that they're a problem, or they've not shown them the things they need to show them that they're cherished. So parents model and they teach the behaviors that we want our children to have, the values we want them to have, the feelings we want them to have. We model and teach it. And even by absence of modeling, we're still teaching something.
Jess in Moorhead writes, in a situation where my abusive ex is not social distancing, do you know of support groups for divorced parents? So we have many families where you have a child in two different households and there are different sets of rules. So in her situation, social distancing not happening. And that's not, I guess, anything she can do about it. What would you say to her, Dr. Wegner? I mean, that's got to be very stressful.
Yeah, I mean, that's the rates. I feel like there's two different things going on here. There's sort of like how do you co-parent and, you know, what's going on there. And then there's also this abusive piece, which, you know, the rates of domestic violence are on the rise right now. People are stuck at home with their partners or in situations they can't get out of. So there's the domestic violence hotline. I'm sure you could get a quick Google and get the number there. I think it might be helpful to do a little bit of parenting work to figure out how to best work with this person. You know, Psychology Today is a resource. We're starting up a program called thenew.com, and we do parent coaching, or BetterHelp or Talk Spaces online. And those are like less coaching, much more therapy, longer term therapy situations. But any of those places are kind of like go-to resources that could help this person.
Any advice for divorced parents, Dr. B? What's out there to assist?
I think the things that are out there to assist parents are things on the web, like Dr. Wegner was saying, but there are also other groups in the city that have support for parents. So for example, there's an organization called PACER that helps parents who have kids who may have special needs. They have support people, they have parent advocates, and a number of programs like at NAACP and also at Urban League. There are ways that parents can connect with each other. At churches or places, people are still trying to find ways for teens and young kids to connect, even if they don't physically come to the church space. A lot of churches are now sponsoring virtual connection activities for their kids from little bitty kids on up to the teenagers. So they're just kind of, and finally in our community, we have United Way 211, where you can get the 411 on what's going on in the community.
Kristen writes this: our teenager interacts with friends online playing video games. How much is too much during this time when they can't physically be together? So I think this pandemic has really altered how we think about, video games and social media, maybe in some cases, because before we're like, no, not too much of that. Now it's like, do what you have to do to fill the time. But how much is too much? And is playing online games with other people that qualify as quality time?
I think if we look through a trauma lens, it's like kind of all bets are off, right? So if this is working in some way, then do what works and follow your gut. This is what we keep coming back to. But also the research, we get very like up in arms about technology, but not a lot of research ties technology to well-being in kids. What we do know though is for kids that are isolated and depressed and anxious, technology can be one way to avoid interactions that really further their kind of issues. So if your kid's a kid that you're really not worried about like their mental health that much, like anxiety, if you're not really worried about anxiety, depression, and you feel like they're functioning pretty normally, I wouldn't worry a ton. If you feel like your kid's an anxious, depressed type kid and they're hiding out with social media and technology, then I would be very cautious to limit it. And we had mentioned earlier, the Atlantic put out an article recently about anxiety and modern parenting, and it talks exactly about this. And it gives some tips, but it also just kind of gives the lay of the land for parents and kids and anxiety.
Dr. B, how much is too much when it comes to online video games and playing games with friends?
I think just like I was saying earlier, it needs to be in moderation. Parents need to put structure on their kids. And I know it's inconvenient for us sometimes as parents to create structure for our kids, but structure isn't a bad thing. It makes kids feel safe. They know where they stop, where their limits are. And sometimes they're going to push it because they're kids. But the truth is, the more structure you provide and let them know you can only have this much, you can talk on that cell phone from 8 to 10, but honey, 10:30 come, you got to shut it down. So you just create those structure around it so that they can fill it with other things, like maybe reading a book. We still have them. We still have books. Kids could read them. And so I'm just saying there are ways that we could increase our kids' skill-based in how to do other things and how to engage in other ways. They could start a COVID book club or something, and they could get good books and talk to each other about that. So it's ways that you can kind of get off that video game track.
Katie in Minneapolis writes this: I'm about to be certified as a foster parent, and I won't be able to get help and support in person from my own parents. Being in a stranger's home during this isolating time has to be stressful in ways I can't even fathom. Feeling loss. Any advice about transitions for a foster parent?
I wonder how old the child is.
I don't know.
Yeah, so what we do know for all kids is routine, structure, consistency is really important to promote safety. Also, when a foster kid comes into your house, you really want to create a vibe of sort of safety, but also like that you're there. So just pay special attention to be like available to the child, right? And they might default by pulling away. You know, that might be a natural defense for them. But really kind of inviting them back to connect, focusing on doing whatever you can to build that connection in whatever way works. And I would be very direct, asking the child if the child's verbal. If the child's not verbal, then you have much more control over this, right? Responding immediately to their needs. You should be the one kind of responding to them to build that attachment and that connection.
So foster parents not able to get as much support as they might be able to if we weren't in these circumstances. Dr. B, any advice?
Yeah, I do. I really have quite a few foster kids in my clinic and foster families. And one of the things I think is important is that depending again on the child's age, what the child needs in that gap between leaving their family to being with a foster parent. Sometimes we do a process called trauma-focused CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, where children get to tell their narratives of what happened and how they landed in the situation they did. So sometimes having kids draw or paint or write letters to their parents or to their peers or whoever, that helps them to go through that process. And also sometimes they actually do need a counselor to help create that link and to empower them, because they have divided loyalties when they leave their family, even if it was abusive to the new family. And that's another whole episode, but yeah.
This from Marilyn in Brooklyn Park. What small ways can we decompress during the day? Any ideas for mini breaks? Any ideas for mini breaks? And we've talked a little bit about just recognizing like, I need to step away from this, but any specific things we could do that would just allow us to have a moment to, and then go back to it. Dr. Wegner?
Yeah, I love, so at our practice, we do a lot of biofeedback. So so there are a lot of apps, and I can send them to you, Angela, if you want like a list, but you can look at your stress response on your phone and kind of look at something called heart rate variability. And then you can do some breathing exercises to bring down your stress response, but you're getting the feedback from your phone. So it's like really concrete. It's really clear. Kids love it. And you think about, we're just at a place in time right now where there's a lot of stress. So we're operating at a higher level of arousal. And what I mean by that is like a higher level of anxiety. So you want to be doing those like meditation exercises, not when you're acutely stressed. It's like first thing in the morning, start your day like that, because it brings down your baseline arousal. So when you start to get stressed, you're going to start from a lower point. So it's like, and the more you do it, the more your body gets used to it. And then you start to hang out at a more relaxed state naturally. It's kind of like exercise, right? Like if you go for a jog for the first time, it's impossible, but we start to do it, your body just, naturally kicks in. It's the same with relaxation, meditation, these exercises. So set like 5-minute goals. Don't, do a little bit, use an app to support it, and then move on.
Any other ideas, Dr. B, on a mini break during the day or in the evening?
Yeah, I actually like what Dr. Wegner said about starting out the day at a space where you relax. A lot of people use that time to pray or meditate. That's the same process. And you can do that throughout the day as you go. And actually, once again, just like you plan your lunch break, plan a break for you to just get mentally recentered and spiritually recentered. And if you allow yourself that opportunity, those 5 minutes can, or even taking a deep breath, just once or twice, will help you to relieve some of that anxiety, because we want to learn how to be awake but more relaxed.
And Dr. B, I want to go back to something you said at the beginning of the conversation. You said you wanted to talk about new ways to connect, as we have to sort of let go of this feeling of loss all the time. We can't do the things we used to do. What are some new ways that we can connect to make the most out of this?
Well, I'm just going to tell you what we do in my family. One of the things we do, we started doing like a tag team. So you call, it's like a phone chain like they used to have before they had internet. So you call somebody, and now that we have conference calling on all these phones, you can call somebody and then they'll link up with somebody else, and that person will link up with somebody else. And you kind of know when you're going to do it. You plan it like 8 at night on a Monday, or you say we're going to do that around Sunday at 3 o'clock. So that's one really fun thing. And you can have people to do different things each time there's a meeting. They either have to come with, they can make a mask, or they can have a poem or a scripture or something that they're going to introduce it with, and you can have the whole family doing it. Another one is that I use is African libations, and that's the pouring of spirit. So even kids who are preschool, everybody in the circle at home, you just pour water, and every time you pour water, you claim something you're grateful for. So it's nothing more beautiful than seeing a 3 or 4 year old say, I'm happy for my frog. I'm glad mom let me have extra Cheerios. It's just beautiful. But what you're teaching is an attitude of gratitude. And that really lifts you up in a time like this when you feel so helpless in other ways. So that's just some examples. And you can do things like your family can, if you have food and you're willing to donate to a pantry, then you can go from house to house in your car, and they can drop the food and don't visit too much and keep going. And you can do that from your family once a week. So it's a lot of ways, if we're creative, that we can show the love to each other and show the love to our communities. And if anybody can do it, it's parents. Because we know how to make ways out of no way.
Well, and there we go. That's our closing remark right there. Our time is up right now. I do want to say thank you to our guests. Thank you to all of our listeners and folks participating in the conversation. So many great questions and answers today. Our guests, again, Bravada Garrett Akinsanya, a licensed psychologist and independent clinical social worker here in the Twin Cities, as well as the head of the African American Child Wellness Institute in Plymouth. Thank you, Dr. B. Always a joy to talk with you. And Dr. Bobby Wegner, joining us from Boston, a clinical psychologist who also teaches human development and psychology at Harvard Graduate School of Education. Thank you for your time, Dr. Wegner.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
A reminder, this has been Spotlight on Parenting During Coronavirus, which is produced by Call to Mind, which is NPR's initiative to foster new conversations about mental health. I'm Angela Davis.